The views expressed on this podcast are Peter Deckham's opinions based on his legal experience, research, and academic work. The podcast does not offer legal advice. For any legal matters, always consult an independent attorney who can assess your specific situation. And now, on with the show.
Peter Deckham again. We looked at what it looked like the landscape appeared to look like anyway, when people were looking at Warner Brothers Discovery. And before we actually knew who the real finalists were going to be, if we think they are going to be. So today we're going into what resulted after Netflix made its bid and seemed to preempt the field, but it was only buying part of the company. And what followed is what this is all about, and prepare for hell. At least that's the way the motion picture television industry looks at the whole thing.
Well, the first question I have is just regarding talent. If the whole industry is going towards tech and algorithms and acquisitions and purchasing on a business level, where does this leave talent?
In the mud. It's not a pleasant place to be these days. I mean, you'll look at self-righteous agents and managers who will tell you, oh, no, my talent is sacred. You'll never do anything without them. But we're at a fairly nascent stage with artificial intelligence. I mean, think about the automobile and the airplane. 1906, 1903 is the first flight. Now we're in outer space. We're doing all kinds of other stuff. So what changes are going to happen? Talent has got to learn how to use AI and not fight AI. And I think there's going to have to be some major compromises in the industry with talent and everybody else. And if you are able to create a wonderful story, I have these words for all the talent and writers and creators that I have in my world. And it's basically to get something made in this world. If you don't have a superstar like Spielberg or Chris Nolan or Jim Cameron fighting for you, here are the words that should guide everybody who is in the world of creativity. Anything, whether it's television or whatever it might be, it takes a village. It's very hard for a single individual creator to get something made. Certain genres are much easier to deal with. One is horror. I represent a couple of most famous horror writers on the planet. Clive Barker is one of them. And I will tell you that the movies that spin off from those properties have been very rich. So you're seeing a lot of stuff in that area. Family entertainment is beginning to take off. Traditional things like rom-coms are going to come back, but they ain't back now. So if you have a rom-com, probably find a way to move it into television, whether it's streaming television or some other form. I don't know what other form there is right now. I have to say that it's an uphill battle.
If you were to look at the product of the industry as stories, and if you reduce that to connection, ultimately, what is the demand out there? If you look at it as the demand for connection, people want to connect with a story. How do individuals fit into the business?
Well, one of the strange things that has happened, unless you're in one of these genres like horror or family where you've established yourself, and they're not actor-driven at all. They're concept and genre-driven, and it's your ability to scare the crap out of somebody or make the kids laugh. Think about a movie theater. Why do we have them? I can see, IMAX is getting a lot of play because it has huge screens. But why do people go to movie theaters? Is it because they don't want to stay home? Not good enough because home's got some pretty good screens. Horror films, people like being scared together. I remember once somebody used to love to go to a horror film and just yell, ah, in the middle of a horrible scene, and the whole audience in the theater would jump. In the world of family entertainment, families get to share an experience, but kids also like to be with other kids. And so if you start understanding what the theater is, what's the construct, it's a whole different mindset. And if you're going to be doing it, I want to be on the big screen. Well, good. We'll put you on the big screen and then throw your ass out. But ultimately, what is appropriate? What is the village that would be interested in my work? How many connections do I have to villagers? And if I have stories, how do I convince people that I am absolutely the best at doing it? Is it because I have a great actor? Maybe I optioned a book, a best-selling book. Oddly enough, books and historical events, historical characters are often very interesting, but then you have to tailor the presentation for the audience you're going. If you're doing a historical period piece about the assassination of a U.S. president in the middle of, the 1800s or whatever, you're going to have a narrow audience, and you damn well better make a perfect production. Other people start doing things, for example, Downton Abbey. It didn't start off on the big screen. It didn't start off as mainstream television. It torqued its way into the public face. So it's really, when people say you got to think out of the box, I tell them there's no box.
To follow up on going to the movies, like why do people go to the movies as opposed to watch the same show in their home? I think of like, why do people go to the gym when you could walk around your own block or you could go to the park? And it all comes down to relationships, connection to others. As you talked about, kids like to watch something with other people. It's the experience. And more as the world becomes both, isolating and then also just expensive, the value of being around others becomes a luxury. So where do you foresee the future of going to the movies fitting in with both the ticket price, but also the value of being around other people and feeling that camaraderie experience of being around others?
Well, family entertainment is about family. And one of the things Disney has is you see the Disney name, you see a Pixar name, you see those names are Disney assets. It's an imprimatur of family quality. And if you're going to spend money, people will spend money on their children before they spend money on themselves. So that's working well there. In terms of horror films, usually what happens is a bunch of friends will go see the movie together. And everyone bears the cost of the ticket. Maybe they're taking somebody, but whatever. But it's not, 4 kids and 2, whatever. And it's more affordable. I think the value is a very big question. Television also gives a lot of cool stuff. And so a lot of theatrical filmmakers are now saying, okay, I'm going to make stuff for television. And then there are people who think, okay, reality television, I'm going to do Dr. Phil. Dr. Phil is one of the greatest catastrophic attempts to go into his programming. In fact, he's filing bankruptcy. Oh, yes, in Dallas. He apparently assumed the world would not, beat a path to his door. They beat a path, but they were called creditors. So he lost that entire operation, that little attempt to separate from the traditional networks. They don't appreciate me. I'm going to create my own network. Didn't work. Next. And you're going to see a lot of failures, a lot of bankruptcies, a lot of reworkings, and that's life. We're in a transitional period. We're in the greatest period of economic risk this nation has faced since the Great Depression.
Will movie theaters survive?
No, not all of them. We have way too many of them. I have to say that the quality of the experience in the theater will depend on the quality of what people are looking for. Do I think we're going to have the 40,000 screens we used to have? No. Do I think it's going to keep going down below 25,000? Yes. I think theaters have a place. Yes. Is the rest of the world exactly facing the same speed of transition that we are? No. So you've got time where you have parallel systems working. One is getting archaic into oblivion, and the rest of the world is going to catch up sooner or later. So we better be ready for it.
Okay, in an industry that's becoming more based on algorithms and the business factors, how does, I think you used the term, the creative spark, how does that survive, and how does that change from the creative sparks that came from the eyes of a movie star in the past to maybe an AI robot or digital figure? How does creative
The
spark?
robot lawyers are terrifying me. I'll just tell you that we're going to see a lot of experimentation, and people will give you their opinions and why it worked after it's worked. But the ability to tell you what's going to work, the closest we've gotten to that is algorithms. And I like to say I love algorithms, but I hate them. But they do, in fact, have a place. I think that making smaller movies, doing vignettes, getting on YouTube and making something smaller, look at TikTok. It's basically become the marketing arm of most studios. And there's a way to do this. And if you're savvy about how to use contacts, influencers have a place, but they're already fading in importance. A lot of this happens if your spark catches. And a lot of risk taking is going to take. Kind of the way, how did they get movies to go when they didn't have any theaters and they didn't have many cameras back in New Jersey when the tailors from Odessa came in and created the motion picture business? How did it happen? And we're going to see that.
If unions and SAG protected the writers and the actors of what may be the past, what regulation bodies protect what needs to be regulated in the future? What does need to be regulated? What potential for exploitation is out there? And then how does that get regulated?
Regulation is a dirty word with the Trump administration. You have AI going out with absolutely no guardrails whatsoever. People with money calling the shots, making big donations toward a certain kind of, I won't mention the ballroom by name. Oops, I did. Those aren't donations, they're bribes. They're basically putting you in good stead with an administration that's judgmental and passes on everything. So do I see a method of taking that spark and creating it? I think a lot of it means you've got to learn how to do little stuff and turn it into big stuff. Build a reputation. Be a little outrageous or be something. I mean, look at the lovely Revolutionary War thing that's being produced on PBS. Good stuff happens. And there are people willing to put money in good stuff. But remember, when you go out to raise money, equity, you are in the most highly regulated part of the finance industry. You can create felonies by just giving somebody a finder's fee. You can create felonies by going out and asking people for money to make a movie, and that's actually could be a crime. So we have regulation. The problem with the kind of regulation we have is rich people can pay to qualify. Ordinary human beings can't. And that's a part of regulation that is problematical. And I think we're just going to have to muddle through it. There's going to be a lot of change. I don't believe that this massive investment in AI is going to pay off for everybody. The people who are putting billions, if not trillions of dollars into things, a lot of that money is just going to go. There's going to be a bubble. And the entertainment business, what is entertainment? Let's go back to where it began. A little fire. You come back from your hunt, me hunter, me gatherer. I have story about bear. And that's where it all started. So somehow that community, that ability to express what the community fears, or maybe to distract them from their fears, or basically we're afraid our kids are going to grow up, and having grown up in a very confrontational world, we'd like to take our kids to stuff that's fun. Fun is absolutely one of the great criteria. This is edutainment. There are networks that do that, but fun is the driving force. How can you make people want to see your stuff and enjoy the fun you offer them?
Okay, if we go with the hopeful idea of someone, quote, small, making something, quote, small, but catches on and lights a creative spark in an audience, how does that small player making a small piece of art not get exploited by, say, even copyright law? Like, how does that person protect their idea from being exploited by the behemoths?
Okay. Number one, there are no protections for literary creations at work in the United States other than registering for copyright. Not registering the Writers Guild, not mailing something to yourself. That doesn't work. You got one thing if you're a writer, creator type person, and that's copyright. Register it. It's cheap. It's worth doing. Number one. Number two, there are many different ways to exploit the same idea. A book, a short, a sequel book, a TV series, a movie. Figure out what you can manage on no money. And believe me, with the technology that exists today, hold up your cell phone and look at it. Your smartphone is a studio. Go do it. Edit it. You can do this stuff. But make sure that if you have real people in these movies, they sign releases. And remember, the family lawyer that wants to do it probably can't, but will do it anyway. And I remember when I began practicing law, for every dollar that somebody saved not having a decent lawyer review the contractual nexus. And it's not just a lawyer, it's a lawyer who knows what they're doing. After a little time passed, they would spend 10 to 15 times the money they saved cleaning it up. Because when you go back to negotiate with people that know you have to have them sign a document because you didn't do it right the first place, they will charge you money because they know you have no choice.
And regarding copyright law, now with the evolution of AI, do you foresee the law in copyright and the entertainment industry needing to change and evolve with AI?
If we had a Congress, if that were to happen, and I know it's a long shot, but there's no question in my mind that this idea that if it's created by AI, it's not subject to copyright is not going to hold. And maybe you'll have a different kind of copyright. Maybe it will be shorter. A lot of people also don't understand copyright. For example, they'll read a book and they'll write a script based on that book and then go to the studios and say, you have to buy this book, but here's my script. The mere act of writing that script based on that book is a copyright infringement. You're actually creating a derivative work, and the right to create derivative works is exclusive to the owner of copyright. All I can say is get the damn copyright, and remember, it takes a village.
And for writers who in the past had no way of using AI to edit their book, their story, their script, and now have an editor in their back pocket, is that going to change what is deemed somebody's authorship?
A lot of people lie through their teeth. They say, I wrote it completely. I did some research with it, but I wrote that, because they know the Copyright Office will not register a work that is primarily created by AI. So we're going to have to get through that. I also believe that we're still early enough in the evolution of AI where originality in storytelling, especially when you're dealing with human emotions, I know that AI is going to be able to make up and tell some pretty funny jokes, but I don't think they're going to be doing I tell, my friend. I'm better at it. But, there's certain things, laughter, comedy, horror. Well, horror, just have AI take a look at itself and make a movie about that. That's a horror film. But ultimately, we have rules that are going to change as AI is able to take over human capacity. Can you raise an AI robotic system as if it had experienced a total life? And maybe you put a couple of those lives together and you say, okay, robot, with your life experience, write this, and then shut up and let them do it. Now, 10 years from now, I'm not sure where it's going to go, but maybe I have a plus. Being an old fart, I don't have to live through it. Unfortunately, my lovely granddaughters, apparently I'm going to have another one.
Yay.
Yay. And my son and his lovely bride, I fear for them. It's not going to be fun. Transition can be ugly, painful, and there are winners and losers in transitions, and we're in that in every phase of our lives.
Is AI chat history discoverable?
Yes. You think, what happens, you think you've erased something, someone comes to your computer and says, oh, I got a techie. Haven't you been watching those? Oh, you don't watch television, so you don't know about forensic files we have at NCIS. We do that. We can take computers that you completely erased. I know when I buy a new computer, I take the hard drive out of the old computer and I have my way with it, which is basically involves a mallet, a hammer, something violent. Just about everything that's ever recorded digitally and electronically can be found and discovered. So if you think you're going to mess around and do that, and someone walks into your home, now we don't need warrants. We've repealed all that stuff. Any federal, maybe state policeman can walk into your home, arrest you, and put you in an alligator center with no warrant whatsoever because, the Bill of Rights doesn't exist. Maybe it'll come back. But just for those who believe in the old system of government, it's all discoverable.
And I just asked that because you said, people lie. And of course, people lie. But in law in cases in an infringement case, or if a copyright ever ended up as a conflict of legal dispute,
It's a catch.
there's a catch.
You know what the catch is?
But
You got the money to hire the researchers and lawyers to ferret that out. Most people who have been ripped off are helpless little beasts like my kitty sleeping over my shoulder here, who are taken advantage of. If you get into that situation, you have to basically have a legal system. You don't know anything about long, never-ending litigation, do you?
ooh, I wish I didn't.
I've been working on one case, gone through 5 different versions of the same case for a decade and a half, and it's still going through the courts. We have a very strange system. The UK system, winner pays legal fees of loser, but we don't have that system unless it's specific in a statutory or some other way. But litigation, I say, is the most expensive form of entertainment known to the rich. If you have a yacht or a jet plane, you can budget for it, start litigation. Good luck with that.
Well, you mentioned technology of the past, and it's becoming obsolete if it hasn't already. And then obviously the technology of AI is on the forefront of the industry and the world. But the rate that technology changes is so rapid now that how can anybody but the biggest of companies with the biggest of budget afford to take the risks to buy the technology of today, knowing that it's going to become obsolete at a lot quicker of a pace? So
Well,
how does anybody keep up with the rate of technology?
you have to be very rich and a lot of waste in it. But ultimately, it's like saying, I've got a fleet of trucks, but I got nothing to put on them. Or I've got 50,000 stores around the world, but the people don't have jobs, so they can't buy my products. This is a balancing act. I laugh at people who decry socialism. They don't even know what the word means. But what happens if you live in a world where people cannot learn skills that pay money? How do the big behemoth companies create products and sales when there's nobody to buy them? These are conundra that we're simply going to have to factor into it. And nobody's thinking that way because everyone thinks, as I wrote in my first book, not on my watch. I'm just going to kick the can down the road. The United States has so many cans down the road that we could probably handle a tin, aluminum, and all kinds of crises because we're not dealing with anything. We got a Congress that's struggling with problems we had 15 years ago. So I say that governments are going to have to struggle with it. People are going to have to struggle with it. And we have something that makes that very difficult and yet very interesting. DEI, which everyone, is having battles over it. Diversity is what makes stuff valuable to different groups of people. If you decide you hate Somalians and you hate Black Africans, and don't sell your products to them. But if they offer you money to buy those products, maybe you should take it. Maybe there is an answer in all this stuff where there is a sort of symbolic or symbiote, I don't know what the word is, symbiosis.
Symbiotic relationship.
What?
A symbiotic
A
relationship.
symbiotic relationship, which is how business and art have existed for years. No one's, Julius II is not going to commission the Sistine Chapel that's not the way you pay artists anymore. We're living a different way, and the new economic structures are going to evolve with the creativity. And AI is not the be all and end all yet. If you guys want to have some fun, go look up the new Nippon television technology that was created for new plasma computing, where it is no longer going to have a computer. I think I mentioned this earlier. That's cemented onto a concrete floor of a very, very, very stable building, and the temperature in that room is 400 degrees below zero. Because right now, quantum computing using qubits instead of binary, requires frozen computers locked down. Except this new technology is figured out, we don't need all that electricity in the future because, we're using light. We're not using electricity. We're making it totally optical. And we can do these calculations, which are millions of times faster. I don't mean 10, 20 times faster. I'm talking millions of times faster than the fastest supercomputers in the world. There's an example I read recently in Fast Company where someone did a very complicated calculation that would have taken 20 years to do with supercomputers in 20 minutes. How are we going to deal with that? I don't know. And we certainly don't have the ethicists that we need to put guardrails around all this stuff. And being rogue has never been easier.
Okay, this is from a little bit different of an angle, but considering that people used to get their entertainment through cable, and now a lot of it, if not most of it, or if not all of it, is through streaming,
Which uses cable.
which uses cable and the internet access.
Which uses cable.
But we pay for it in a different way. Everybody has a huge internet bill each month. Why is internet not a public utility?
Because the people who have all the money elect all the people who make the decisions. Are you a donor to my damn ballroom? Are you a donor to my damn campaign, my inauguration? How come you're not donating? I guess I can't give you the exemption on the tariff you asked me to give you. I guess I can't award you that government contract. I'm not mentioning any names, but welcome to the world. If we don't clean up our political system, it's not going to work for anybody. It's not going to work for billionaires. I mean, when you think about people building all these gated communities, if you're having a rebellion of big bucks, all you got to do is find the gated communities and send your troops in.
Do you see a point in time where the demand, not the artistic demand, but the financial demand diminishes simply because it's cost prohibitive?
I think they just shift into something else because people want to be entertained. And I guess that may not be watching MS Now and entertainment or Fox, whatever your proclivity is. But, one of the things I'm trying to do with my series of podcasts is to raise issues and deal with facts. And people who are fact averse, they have their theories about the world and they act based on those theories. They're wrong. And they'll find out the hard way. Oh, you can in fact get COVID again. Oh, you can die from measles. Oh, you can lose your shirt on Wall Street. There's some realities. I mean, the crash of 2000, .com crash, the prime, subprime market in real estate, 2007 and 8, it happened. The Great Depression happened. If you don't think that can happen again, I got a bridge you should buy in Brooklyn. It needs a lot of work, by the way.
Does being in Hollywood, physically in Hollywood, matter anymore? Or is everything so digital, or have other geographic areas become more important? Like, what's the value of being in Hollywood anymore?
Very little, unless you want to pay a lot for real estate. Most everything that you can do, the people, the negotiators, and I'm even thinking about moving out of California, is you need people who know what they're doing. They may have learned it in Hollywood, but it's very transportable. The reality, we're decentralizing everywhere. I will just say for all those creative people who are relying very heavily on AI, I had a legal question, and I dealt with a lawyer that I really respected, and she asked me a question about life story rights, and she gave me a printout from her AI program defining what you have to do if you're making a movie or TV series based upon real people. And I read it, and it was sort of accurate, but the little nuances that I have from being in this industry for 1,000 years blows that AI all to hell. I said, look, don't use it. I mean, you can make mistakes. The other thing is, a lot of the things she was considering, it depends on which state you're in. It's not one uniform law about the descendability of life story rights, for example. So if you're making an assumption, well, this person's dead, I can make the movie. Good luck with that. It's not true in many, in fact, most states, and they all have different ways, different limitations. So part of this over-reliance on AI not only has the risk of changing your ability to think and do things that require original logical analysis, but you also might be wrong. AI is not an abundance of accuracy. We call them hallucinations. I thought that was a political term myself, but apparently AI has those too. And judges don't forgive lawyers whose AI program hallucinated.
But will that get better with time as AI evolves and gets smart, quote unquote, smarter?
Well, the interesting is if you take away all the jobs through AI, who's left to buy stuff? Something to think about. You could take all the jobs away, and then everyone, what, you're going to have a universal basic income? Everybody gets an allocation. That is socialism.
Well, I think that ties into one of the themes, the global themes of your podcast, which you've talked about a few times, is what happens when we get to that level where the consumers can no longer afford to consume. And where does that leave the producers of products? Like, where do we end up at that point?
I think we're watching things happen in this arena. As MAGA said, we're pissed. So we're going to go and get the richest people in the world to run our country and we'll do whatever they tell us. And lo and behold, they suddenly say, you know what? We want all the money. So all you consumers out there, the tax code is not written for you to make money. It's written specifically for rich people to make money and for everyone else to pay money. When you have a $3 trillion tax cut, little thing like that, and all of a sudden you say, well, how are we going to pay for that? We have $38 trillion of national debt. Oh, we'll cut the medical services. We'll get rid of all the losers. I'm pretty successful, and I listen to that talk, and I think, well, I'm a loser too.
Okay, so how does the tax code and our tax structure specifically tie to the movie film industry? And like, for good or for bad, how is it affecting the trajectory of the industry?
Tax incentives are now a basic ingredient in most productions. I helped architect the tax incentive structure for the state of New Mexico, for example. And if you don't have tax incentive structures, but you'll also see what happens in places in Europe where subsidies are subsidizing what writers want to make as a pet project because the government wants to foster local production. So they make incredibly intellectually brilliant movies that are so boring that people no longer have to take sleeping pills. I have to say that we have no national tax policy in the United States that incents motion picture production. And that's not true. Canada has, every province has their own tax incentives, and the overall government does. So everyone approaches it in different ways. I think part of this is the audience knows what it wants, and a lot of these things get in the way of filmmakers deciding to do the stuff that is something the audience wants. A lot of filmmakers, and I've dealt with thousands of them, believe that because I want to make it, I have a right to make it, and they will have, if I make it, they will come. Wrong. I can't tell you how many people have come to me with their sons and daughters or friends' scripts and say, this is better than Star Wars, or this is better than Titanic, or this is better than... And, you listen to that, and everybody who hears that just tunes it out. Don't even try comparing yourself to a big hit. You're sounding stupid. What you've got to do is find that village that believes in your creativity and have that village unite into getting your production made, or do little bits and pieces, sprinkle your ideas, try YouTube, go out on TikTok. There are ways to get a reputation that makes creativity easier. Do it and take risk. And remember, there's no box to think out of anymore.
Okay, one more question. You mentioned that there's this element of hedging against risk and using a CYA by getting a named somebody with value to their name to endorse a project. Does just making a lower cost project hedge or eliminate that risk? Or how can people who can't get endorsed by a big name, how do they get around that?
Well, the problem with money is nobody gives a shit if you can't raise it. Nobody cares. You're a brilliant filmmaker, creative person, but no one believes in you. Nobody gives a shit. And that's a reality. So how do you get people to give a shit? It's not by making something cheaper. If I told you I could make a car, people don't buy cars anymore. The average cost is $50,000. But let's say I could say I can make a car. It doesn't have air conditioning. You have to basically fill the solar thing every day for 3 hours, and it costs $12,500. That's what BYD is doing in China. How many Americans buy those things? The answer is it isn't about what you pay. It's about the value, the perceived value. If you stop looking at budget and start looking at perceived value as the real metric, you're better off. Just because you can make it cheaper doesn't mean shit.
So what factors add measurable, like if you break value down to data points, what data points?
You're trying to create algorithms. The answer is not about data points. It's about doing something that's compelling, that you believe passionately in, and you have people who look at you and say, wow, I love that.
So the creative spark. This is where the creative spark comes.
And knowing how to market it. I remember in my early days when I represented completed motion pictures, someone came in and said, well, I spent $10 million making this movie. So I should get a lot of, I said, let me tell you something. When distributors look at your movie, unless you're in a bidding war, or unless you won a bunch of awards, they're looking at every penny you spend as having a zero value today, because you're asking them to support the marketing costs with future dollars. So you want them to spend more money and you want them to pay you money too. Marketing and understanding how getting to market is one of the single most important parts of being a creative person. How do you communicate with the audience you're trying to reach? How do you know what they want, and how do you embrace them? And if you know how to use social media, if you know how to create vignettes, if you know that YouTube, for example, will move stuff up when it's popular, there are ways to go. Do it.
Even if fitting into that algorithm means diluting your authentic creative idea. Or is there a balance between that?
You're introducing a bias into what you just said, that whatever this marketplace could be, we don't want to have that. This is not creativity by committee. Actually, films and television are creative. If you look at a movie or whatever, there are lots of people. Look at the credits. There are a lot of people joined together to make the product. But ultimately, it's a balancing act. If you are trying to be in a business of selling creativity and nobody wants to buy what you're selling, what do you got?
$0.
Great. You can look at it on your little TV screen or your smartphone screen or whatever your screen is and say, wow, I'm brilliant. And then have all the people who gave you money sue your ass because you violated every securities law in the book. That's life.
This is where art meets business.
The motion picture, when you read books about the motion picture business or industry, I've never read a book about the motion picture art that has ever been read by anybody who wants to make a movie. Doesn't work that way. Mm-hmm. Film historians are not particularly successful in predicting the future success of product. Product, I said the word, content, other words. So we use a lot of neutral things like this. But you talked about a spark. Not enough to have a spark. I once, my son, when he was about, 12 or 13 years old, I asked him a question. I said, what is a brilliant idea worth? And he had this look on his face. And I said, what do you think? He said, well, it really depends on the idea. And I looked at him and said, it might depend on the idea, but what makes success is not the people who have the ideas, the people who implement the ideas. I asked him, what was Bill Gates famous for? He said, well, he got, Microsoft, and he came out, all kinds of DOS, MS, all that stuff. I said, that wasn't created by Bill Gates. He paid the engineer who created the $60,000, and that was the end of it. So you really have to sit there. If you're so vainglorious that you have to look in the mirror and say, I'm really brilliant as a filmmaker. I cannot tell you how many people who've never made a movie tell me that about themselves. And I should just take it on faith that they're not lying to me. They may even not be lying to me. But that doesn't work that way. And the answer is, having the idea is a great spark, but figuring out how to implement the idea is infinitely more valuable. The reality is, if you combine both, that's where home runs come from.
Thank you for this discussion, Peter.
She's got a knife in her hand, and I know I'm going to get stabbed. Thank you, everybody, for being there. And until next time, woo!
Bye.
Bye.
If you would like to give feedback, suggestions for new topics, or have a question that might be selected for a future podcast, please email us at decumpodcast@gmail.com. Thank you for listening. Until next time.